Abraham's social seichel. Seichel is a Yiddish word based on a Hebrew word, and it means know-how, his smarts. Uh, how the way Abraham behaved with people created space for grace. Well, what we're going to be looking at is that Abraham is our model, not just for relationship with God. We're used to that. We think of Abraham as a model of relationship with God, but he's also a good model for our relationships with people. Now, he wasn't perfect in the Torah when he lies about Sarah being his wife when he's down in Egypt. That was a no-no, but he straightens up his act after that, and there's a tremendous amount for us to learn from him about his behavior with other people. So we're going to take a look at 7 life lessons for improving our relationships and our communication with people. And these are fascinating. And then, with all of that in mind, we're going to focus on how does this contribute to improving our faith sharing? How does it contribute to improving our batting average, let's say, with people when we're trying to share our faith? I'll have much to say about that. But first, let's talk about reasons why we're focusing on this. First of all, I am of a conviction, and maybe you join me in this, I'm of a conviction that very few Yeshua believers actually share their faith with other people. It doesn't happen very much. They leave it to others. Sometimes it's because they've had experiences in life where they failed. They tried to do it and it was very awkward, it was embarrassing, it brought them repercussions, it brought them no success, and they just don't want to go there again. So they leave that particular field of battle and they just don't do it anymore. And sometimes people's conviction is that they don't know how. They think of faith sharing as a highly developed skill which they do not possess, and they don't know exactly how to get it, and they just rather leave it for the experts. But as I said, I want us to improve our act in this regard, and I think that it's helpful to realize that in faith sharing, it's not so much that we need to focus on skills and on knowledge. I think we need to focus on style. Sharing faith is a very relational thing. I was thinking about this the other day. So let's say you work in an office, and somebody in that office has just fallen head over heels in love with somebody. Are you likely to discover that? Yes, you are. The person is going to be transformed by this, and they're going to have no trouble communicating, even without opening their mouth, that something of this sort has happened to them. The issue is not so much their know-how, it is really the style of how they act. All of a sudden, everybody knows. And maybe you've been the kind of believer that other people who knew you all of a sudden said to you, David, what's with you? What happened to you? I know that by the grace of God, when I became a believer, my life was revolutionized, and people noticed. And it's not a matter of knowledge, it's a matter of the style of how we act. We're going to look at the style of how Abraham acts and what we can learn from it for our lives and what we can learn from it for faith sharing. Here's a quote from Marshall Portnoy, who wrote that article that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. He says that Abraham is a wholly modern figure, astute, subtle, mature, compassionate, and compelling, a leader unlike most represented in ancient literature or onward. So he's fascinated with Abraham the man, and I think we would do well to be fascinated as well. So let's take a look at Abraham, at some of the things he demonstrates. First of all, he demonstrates that we should not try to overpower people but rather to empower them. Don't try to overpower people, but empower them. We see this from an incident with Abraham and his wife. As you know, his wife was barren, and she was quite old. And when she was close to 90, she figured, this is not working out. I'm totally humiliated by not bearing children. So she gives Abram Hagar, her handmaid, as a surrogate. And that was culturally permitted in those days. It was culturally encouraged that a woman could fulfill her responsibilities in terms of bringing a child into her husband's family through her maid if she herself was unable to do so. So she gives Hagar to Abram, and Hagar gets pregnant. And then she gives birth to Ishmael, and Sarah is miserable. She's humiliated. She's more unhappy than she was before, and she complains raucously to Abram. And she says, you know, I don't want to have anything more to do with this woman. Get this woman out of the house, please. Get her out of the house. Now, what does Abram do? Very interesting what he does, because his son Isaac will do something entirely different in a similar situation. When Isaac's wife Rebekah is also barren, and she complains to Jacob that she's not having any children, he says, "What am I, God? Am I God that kept you from bearing a child?" He shows no sympathy for her. He just argues with her. But Abram does an entirely different thing. Abram doesn't try to minimize or try to soothe her like Elkanah tries to soothe Hannah, who also can't bear a child, and he tries to soothe her, and he says something really stupid. He says, "Aren't I better for you? Am I not better than 10 sons?" And the answer to that is, no, stupid. I'm disgraced by not bearing children. You are not better than 10 sons. That was a stupid thing to say. But Abraham doesn't say something stupid. What he does is he says, look, she's in your hand. Do with her as you will. He empowers Sarah. He says, Sarah, you have the power to fix your problem. So, Sarah, you have the power. Go for it. At that point, at a time when Sarah feels powerless and victimized, Abram reminds her of her power, which she uses. That's so brilliant. So in our lives also, in our faith sharing, I don't know if you've ever seen somebody who tries to argue other people into the faith, who tries to overwhelm them with their grasp of data and their multiple Bible verses and their smarts and their argumentation. It's very, very distasteful. It's very distasteful to overpower people. Instead, we should empower them. If somebody, for example, you're trying to share faith with them, and they say, you know, I don't really believe in God. And you say, if you don't mind my asking, can you tell me a reason, one reason you don't? And they say, well, I don't believe in God because there's so much suffering in the world. And you might say to them, I understand that. That's very rational. If you ever want, I can recommend some resources that will give you something to think about in that regard. There you're empowering the people. You're not behaving like an all-knowing guru, and you're not making them feel bad at all. You're offering that they have the ability themselves, with a little bit of help from their friends, to deal with their own issues. So number one, don't empower people. Abraham did not, don't overpower people, but empower them. That's what Abram did. Secondly, watch and use body language. This is really important. In these two readings today, that is the Torah and the Haftorah reading, we see a lot of prostration, a lot of bowing. this is not unimportant. It was language for showing vulnerability, for demonstrating respect, for demonstrating an awareness of the pecking order. So when people come into the presence of King David, when Bathsheba does, who was his wife, she prostrates herself on the ground, which means she's lying face down on the ground with her hands out and her feet back, totally vulnerable. She's indicating, I am totally vulnerable to you. I'm acknowledging your power, and I honor you with your power. Nathan does the same thing when he comes in. And Abram, when he meets the sons of Chet, he himself, who's a very old man at that point, I don't know exactly how old he is, he's probably 160 something because he'll die before very long at 175. And he's a very old man and a very fabulously wealthy and powerful man. He's fabulously wealthy. But when he comes in their presence, he immediately prostrates himself on the ground. And his body language indicates respect and it indicates that he's not a threat. When we try to share with people, our body language helps to convey that we are respectful and we're not a threat. Or it conveys something very different. There's a man named Merabian, who was, I think it's Andrew Merabian. He was a famous communications specialist. And he says that in a communicational event, emotionally, 7% of our impact is from the words we say. 7%. He says 38% is from our tone of voice. So that's tone of voice is more than 5 times more influential in conveying emotional tone than even the words that we say. But body language is 55%. More than half of our impact in what we say to people, in our communicating with people, is due to body language. And as any detective knows, very many times people's body language contradicts what they're saying with their mouth. They may be speaking all kinds of friendly words with their mouth, but their body shows hostility, or it shows something which doesn't advance their cause. So just as Bathsheba and Nathan the prophet and Abraham watched their body language so they could present themselves as unthreatening, as vulnerable, as supplicants. So we should watch our body language. I know one guy, I was talking to somebody about this today, one guy who when he shares with somebody about Yeshua, he does this. He very often has his hand out with his finger, and he's making points like this. That's very aggressive. It's off-putting. Watch your body language. Okay, number 3, come as a servant and not as a master or a guru. It's very tempting, especially for me as a rabbi, for me, a person who's quite conscious that I have a PhD in intercultural studies, quite conscious that I have an MA in intercultural studies. I'm a person who is honored by many people who call me rabbi, and that is an honor, and they respect me. It's dangerous that I would approach people like an expert. I accomplish nothing by approaching people when I want to share faith with them, by posturing myself as an expert. We might have an interesting conversation, but nothing is accomplished. It's better to behave as a servant. Yeshua said this. He said, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and he who behaves like a benefactor is great among them. But it's not so among you. Instead, whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And he said, I am among you as one who serves. If I washed your feet, then you should wash one another's feet. There was a book written by Robert Greenleaf some years ago that I read during my studies, and it was called Servant Leadership. When you come to people as their servant, when you exude, hello, I'm Stuart Dauermann, or I'm Rusty Rothstein, or I'm Johnny Johnson, or I'm Michael David Ramos. How can I help you? Can I help you? Is there something I can help you with? That has got more likelihood of getting traction than posturing yourself as somebody who knows a lot. Even if you know a lot, you're going to be talking to yourself. Okay. Fourthly, come as a supplicant. When Abraham comes to the elders, everything about his language and his body language is that he's a guy who has a big need, and he's imploring them to help him with his need. When I went to school, one of my professors was C. Peter Wagner. The C stands for Charles, but he never used that. Peter Wagner was one of the most highly networked Christians in the world. I mean it. He knew everybody. Internationally, he was a tremendous big shot. And he worked on that. He knew how to network and how to develop influence. He was a person who, on the one hand, I admired. On the other hand, he was not like me. One time in class, he said, I don't spend time with losers. He was very frank. It was a way of saying that I try to spend my time with people who are really getting something done in the world so I can learn from them and I can do things in the world. But it was distasteful for me that he said I don't spend time with losers. But still, I saw Peter Wagner on more than one occasion. If he met with somebody who knew more about something than he did, something that was important to him, Peter Wagner would go up and ask the person a question, and then he would look at them like this. He would look like a child with his mouth open, and he'd pay perfect attention. He wouldn't posture himself as a big shot. He would posture himself like a supplicant, like someone who was being asked, asking for help, who really could not help himself in this area. He was not ashamed to communicate neediness, which is what it is to be a supplicant. He would communicate neediness, and he understood, as Abraham understood, and as we should understand, that there is a difference between force and power. You can exert tremendous power without exerting any force. Power is something that helps you to get something done. It helps you to move forward, helps you to find out what you need to find out, helps you to convince the people you need to convince. You can do all of that with being respectful and humble and unthreatening. That's tremendously powerful. Whereas force makes people shut the gate, the door in your face. I've been thinking lately, and I'm talking here to David Seichel, Dr. David Seichel. I've been thinking lately about a famous personal injury lawyer, the most successful American personal injury lawyer ever. His name was Jerry Spence. If he's still alive, he's in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. He's a very eccentric man, but absolutely brilliant and wildly successful in getting money from juries, in influencing juries to give huge amounts of money to his clients. And I won't tell you all the secrets he tells. It's fascinating in the book. But I'll tell you one thing he says. He says, the first thing you have to do is open the jury to your position. What you do is you give them permission to reject you. Tell them right up front, I'm here to try to tell you something and try to convince you of something, but I want you to know that you have every right to reject me if you wish to. You have every right not to accept what I say. Now, why does he do that? Because if people feel you're trying to convince them, they get defensive. They're on their guard. They don't want to be pushed. They don't want to be swindled. They don't want to be changed. But if you tell them, I give you every right to just throw everything I say away, you make them non-defensive. You tell them, you know, I'm respecting your right not to agree with me. That's a very subtle thing, but it's powerful. There's a lot of power in these kind of tactics where force will have the opposite effect from what you want. Here's number 5. Always show respect. That's everything I've been saying talks about that. Abraham shows tremendous respect for these people. I've told you before, he's fabulously wealthy. Nathan, when he comes in before the king, nothing but respect. Bathsheba, when she comes before the king, nothing but respect. They have great things to ask him for, and they ask him in the midst of respect. And Abram especially is very compelling. Number 6, pay what you owe. When Abraham finds out that the land that he wants is 400 shekels, he pays it. What does that have to do with us? How does that have to do with us when we're sharing faith? Well, sometimes, and I've been guilty of this more times than I want to count, somebody will ask you a question. They'll say, look, I don't understand this one thing about what you believe. And then they give you a question. And you say, I'll do some research on it and get back to you. Do the research and get back to them. People will remember that you promised to do something and you didn't do it. They will also remember that you promised to do something and you did. So pay what you owe. Finally, the Columbo method. Move things forward by asking questions. It's interesting when Abraham stands before God interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah. He moves things forward by asking questions. He says, suppose there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you destroy the city? Will you save the city for the sake of 50 righteous? That's a question. God says, yes, I will. His next statement is also a question, and his next statement is a question, and his next statement is a question, and his next statement is a question. The whole thing is questions. Lieutenant Columbo does that. He, when he interrogates people, when he's trying to find out a case, when he's trying to move things forward, when he's trying to intimidate people, he does it with questions. So learn from Abram. Abraham moved things forward with God by asking questions. And in our sharing our faith with people, we move things forward by asking questions. So let me tell you a story. The day the rabbi went to synagogue, a true story. When I first became rabbi at Ahavat Zion, it was during the last week of December in 1991. In 1992, there was a meeting held at Beit Am, which is on La Cienega Boulevard, and about a mile from where Ahavat Zion used to be in Beverly Hills. And I heard that there was a meeting at Beit Am, which was all about Messianic Jews and Jews for Jesus, and it was a meeting of alarm, that they were meeting in order to be taught about these terrible groups and what they need to do about it. Well, here I am. I'm the brand new shiny rabbi at Ahavat Zion, And I figured, position-wise, I needed to go. And I started thinking about my experience in Jews for Jesus. In Jews for Jesus, let's see. Do I have this? Well, okay. In Jews for Jesus, when we evangelized, we used the word sortie. We would go out on a sortie. Do you know what a sortie is? It's a military term for going from your home base into enemy territory and then coming back. Again, it's a military term for journeying out of your home base into enemy territory and then coming back. Now, that's a terrible word to use for the evangelistic enterprise. When we're going to the Jewish people, are we going to enemy territory? We're supposed to be willing to die for these people. These are not our enemies. These are our people, people for whom the Messiah died. So I decided when I went to that synagogue that day that I would go defenseless. I didn't bring any literature. I didn't intend to make any whiz-bang presentations. I just went because I should go. And what happened is when they were talking about Jews for Jesus, with whom I formerly worked, and they were talking about Jewish believers in Jesus, and they were saying some very terrible and exaggerated, over-exaggerations. And I raised my hand. And I said, excuse me. So I said something like this. I said, I'm the rabbi of a Messianic synagogue, a synagogue of Jews that believe in Jesus, about a mile away from here. And I was also one of the founders of Jews for Jesus. I think it's without question that I know more about Jews who believe in Jesus, that I know more Jews that believe in Jesus than anyone else in this room. And I want to respectfully say that what you're saying is unjust and inaccurate. I said something like that. But what I'm saying to you now is that you can exert power without using force. You can exert power by appearing to be somewhat defenseless, by imploring people, by telling somebody, I've got a problem, I'd like you to answer, I'd like you to help me with my problem. That's very powerful. 4 things that we might do with all of this. First of all, seek opportunities to cultivate relationships with people who don't believe as you do, as we do. You might say to that person who's hopefully an acquaintance or a friend or even a relative of yours, you might say, I've got a problem. You got 10 minutes? I want to tell you a story, a true story about me, and I want to ask your opinion. And then you tell a story about where you felt that God had shown up for you in some significant way in your life. You tell them that story, and then you say, now, to tell you the truth, I think in this story, the God of the universe showed up to help me. Do you think I'm crazy? Isn't that a great way to witness to people? You're making yourself vulnerable. You're not posturing yourself as an expert. You're asking their opinion. Seek an opportunity to do that. Secondly, imitate Abraham and all these qualities that I just talked to you about. Thirdly, realize that our job, especially with Jewish people, is to get Jewish people curious about Yeshua and about our faith. They think they already know, like those people at Beit Am on La Cienega Boulevard. They thought they already knew. They didn't know enough to know they didn't know. They weren't devious or insincere. They were deadly sincere, but they were misinformed and uninformed. So the first thing we have to do is to get people curious, because if they think they know, you can't tell them anything. So first they have to know that they don't know like they think they know. Get them curious. Number 4, here's a good goal for all of us. in our circle of friends and family, and I've not done this with my family, and I should think about why that hasn't happened. It's true with one person in my family, I think. But we need to become the go-to person in our family, that when somebody's really in trouble and they want somebody to pray for them, this is especially in a health situation, you're the go-to person that they come to. They say, Stuart, I don't agree with you, but I know you take God seriously. And if you do me a favor and pray for me, I've got a very serious problem. It's a nice goal to become the go-to person. And that's about all I have to say, except I hope that you learned something from Abram, who was an exceedingly powerful man and exerted that power by seeming to be harmless, to be unthreatening, but he was extremely powerful without using force. May the same be said of us. In Yeshua's name, Amen. Okay, Rusty, it's in your hands. I suggest that